So I came in overnight on one of those very short flights from New York, and your major task tonight is going to be to keep me awake with good questions. So what I'm planning to do is just talk a little bit, enough so that you know what you might want to ask questions about. But first, just for my edification, how many of you are students? Raise your hands. Okay. Science students? Entrepreneurs, startups? Oh, great. Professors? Press? Cosmonauts? Okay. So this is also really not going to be as much about investing as it's simply about the fundamental cool changes I'm seeing happening. And you heard my long, it sounded really illustrious career. I have a kind of short attention span. And most of you probably at some point took math, and you had a professor who did some kind of proof on the board, lots of equations and numbers, and then he said, there, that is the beginning of the proof. The rest is the exercise for the reader. And to me, the internet right now, it's kind of like an exercise for the reader. It's clear it matters. It's clear all this stuff. Photo sharing is big. Facebook is big, and so forth. The thing that hasn't been proved yet is health, not healthcare. It's actually pretty easy technically to figure out how to fix healthcare, change the incentives. And it's different in the UK from in the US, but healthcare is a pretty known and understood field. It has lots of problems, but they're intelligible problems. And in the United States and also in Europe, healthcare is a huge market. It's big, drugs, hospitals, clinics, devices, therapies, treatments, medical groups, whatever. And then there's another even bigger market that we don't talk about at all in those terms, and that's the market for bad health. So I don't know what you drank before you came here or what you're going to drink afterwards, how late you're going to stay up working on your startup, how much fries and beans and what other bad things, pasties, all kinds of bad things, and a lack of exercise because now it's cold, and maybe you bike to work, but mostly you probably stay inside and drink beer or something. So that's bad health. And it's a market that's fueled by huge amounts of advertising and is also fits very naturally into what evolution makes us like: sugar, fat, lazing around. And the new market is the market for good health, which was maybe Nike sports shoes, some health clubs, Virgin, Athletic. But like so many things, there wasn't really much you could sell about health. It was kind of like housework. Housework and cooking have become commercialized, and to some extent, that's about to happen to health. And there are two big reasons. One is the whole quantified self movement. So who knows about quantified self? Okay. Who's got a pedometer on them right now? No. Who's got some kind of pulse meter? Or who's got anything that measures them right now?
My brain. I know my pulse by just consulting myself.
I see. Okay. Good start. Well, my mother tells me that when my brother and I were small and we had the chickenpox, my brother just started wailing and moaning all the time. But I counted the spots. And then I counted how many emails are in my inbox every evening when I go to bed. And that is a very good indicator of my stress. But I also now wear a pedometer. I use the Zio sleep monitor. And I'm convinced that in a couple of years, for me and anybody else, there's going to be a way to measure all kinds of things that vary in your blood, various kinds of biomarkers. I've also done my 23andMe genome, which is really, really interesting, but doesn't change the way the biomarkers do. And I could go on at length about genomes, and I will if anybody asks me to, but what is actually more germane to staying healthy is looking at the biomarkers and trying to move them up and down, whatever they might be. So that's the first part. It's the ability to get knowledge about our own bodies and to measure them and compare them with other people, do large kinds of statistical research, figure out correlations between diseases and genes and biomarkers and so forth. But there's still one thing missing, and that's motivation. So it's the difference between knowledge, which is easy, we'll call that Google, and then the motivation, which usually comes from other people, whether it's status or competing. But the moment you start sharing your information with other people, and they either encourage you or compete with you or check in on you, that's when I think it's going to be much more possible to really have good health spread the way bad health has been spread by advertising and watching other people's behavior. So to me, the combination of social networks and the data is the really exciting frontier for the next 5 or 10 years. What's likely to happen is it will start with early adopters who do it kind of because they enjoy it and they've always done this kind of stuff, and they'll pay for the devices. Then eventually employers will start paying, as is happening in a few cases, because employers, they'd like the stuff to work, but they want their employees to think they love them. So even if it doesn't work, if it makes their employees feel more loved and so forth, they'll do it anyway. And then finally, the insurance companies or the governments who really look at the numbers, with luck, the first two groups will have developed enough data for this stuff to actually be proven to work and for it to be funded quite broadly. So that's my beautiful, naive, elegant vision of the future. And we can do questions, I'm happy to talk about, obviously, what I just talked about, also cosmonaut training, the new top-level domains, which I think are a bad idea, or anything else.
Actually, I think I'll open it to the audience. Do we have mics?
I would say we don't need them, but you probably are recording it, so we do.
Okay.
And can people say who they are and what they do or something? Like what your pulse is if...
Okay, we'll get a mic to you here.
My question is this. To what extent might it be the case that people become obsessively introspective if they were to take... I have a background, forgive me, in science, and I've developed an application. My interest in psychophysiology, because I believe emotions allied to psychophysiology drive us and either make us good as individuals, in families and groups, and in organizations. And in that case, if we can change to some extent by various inputs our psychophysiology, that input is more long-lasting, according to my trainers and lecturers, than, say, higher level, like, for instance, psychotherapy, counseling, even coaching, and say psychoanalysis. It's my contention. So getting back to my question is, to what extent might people become obsessively introspective if they're monitoring all these various outputs of the body? Yeah,
you can call it obsessively introspective. You could call it narcissistic. There's always a danger people will overdo things. And yeah, I'd rather have them overdo this than drinking beer or taking drugs. But if you have an addictive personality, they can get addicted to this just as much as to anything else they can. So yeah, there's a danger, but it's probably a less dangerous danger than a lot of things they could be doing instead. And to the extent you have them share it with others, with luck, maybe their friends will keep them from going totally nuts.
No, I actually would advocate it. It was a devil's advocate question because I'm interested in the very topics that you cover there. By the way, I have to confess, when I landed in Dublin, I did have a very slow pint of Guinness, and I understand if you have a slow pint of Guinness, it lowers cholesterol.
I see. Well, one thing is to find out whether that's really true.
If I could just ask a question, kind of an add-on to that, is what is or will be the reaction of the medical profession to if this?
Yeah. Well, the medical profession consists of lots of different kinds of people, but our experience with 23andMe has been, I think, a good example of this. There's a couple of states, including New York, in which it's illegal to spit in the tube, in other words, to give your sample. And it's a combination of paternalism. Oh my gosh, this is really dangerous data. There was a hearing on it in Congress. One of our esteemed Congress people said, women are getting this information and they're taking their ovaries out by themselves. And yeah, with a spoon, I don't know. But there's this concern that this information is so scary that normal people cannot handle it. And it brings me back to the Middle Ages when there was something about if you looked into a mirror, you could see the devil. Because a mirror was a new kind of information, and it was scary. So there's the power of the new information, whatever it is, and then there's the nervousness a lot of doctors feel when confronted with information that they don't understand as well as their patients do. And so they just feel threatened when the patient comes in asking questions, knowing more than the doctor does. And then there's the financial thing. Gee, if somebody's going to have their genome done, I want my cut. So it's a combination of all those, and some doctors think it's really great and work with their patients. But certainly, like anything new and like anything where the individuals are empowered vis-a-vis the institution, there's a lot of pushback from the authorities. And in Europe it's the same. There are various laws. Apparently in France it's illegal to possess your own genetic information. That's what I heard yesterday. That I cannot vouch for, but that's what I heard. So.
Very good.
May I make it just very, very simple? It's how I designed my app, having seen many others and having trained in it. My background is in medical sciences. If we just think, this is how simple it is. If we think of a number of figures, 5, 120, 80, 70, and if I remember, 25. The first is our blood glucose level, just where it should be. 120 over 80 is roughly where our BP blood pressure should be. 70 is useful just to have your mean heart rate. And the other is the BMI, body mass index, of around 25, if I remember correctly. So it's as simple as that. The other way, how I got feedback on my body, I passed a pharmacy 3 weeks ago in our local town. I got my blood fats and their ratios taken and my blood glucose level. My head wasn't zapped from it. Well, admittedly, I know the figures, and I found it very easy. So I'm suggesting another thing that men might look at, particularly over, say, 50, is their PSA, and if they had something strapped to their body, which that's prostate-specific antigen, it's not a bad idea to know that. So would you not think, before we know, for instance, our genome, which I know the picture on the wall bit, those figures, and they're a cinch to get, and it's not that expensive. But it is in the mind of the person. It requires behavioural change, and people should not be spooked by this. And that clearly involves the sending out of the message to the population to do these things. It's not Einsteinian, really. Yeah. It's quite simple. Except the change in behaviour is the difficult bit.
If the premise is that it's more useful to know that than your genome, you're right. It's much more useful. And I mean, you can look at people and know that they're not eating enough broccoli a lot of the time. So it's not even the numbers. One interesting thing, though, I had a guy come to me. I didn't really like him. He had a company that was selling scales. The scales, like the wee things, connected by Wi-Fi. They would inform your doctor, and he would call you up if you were gaining weight, and a special algorithm. And he was going to sell them through doctors who in the US really liked this idea because it would enable them to bring in more patients and charge them. And the consumers liked them because they needed an authority figure like their doctor. If their wife nagged at them, they would probably go eat more. But if their doctor did, they might pay attention. But he just was a little too Sharpie businessy for my taste. And then he told me this one other interesting thing, which is something like 25% of the people they tested this thing on didn't mind their doctors being informed, didn't mind the weighing, but did not want to see the number. I mean, just like the genome, the number itself, the specificity, I don't know, perhaps like you can't hide from this number. They really, really didn't want to see it. So, I mean, on the one hand, you have people who might get obsessive. On the other, you have people who don't even want to see the number. They just want some kind of gentle reminder, or they want their friends encouraging them. So the point of this is you're going to find all types. And from an investor point of view, segment the market by psycho something.
Okay, very good. Martin?
Hello? Hello? Yeah. Hello, I'm Martin Kelly from IBM, from the Venture Capital Group. So I had two questions. If you look at how much money has been made using the internet to transform the travel industry or the entertainment industry or commerce, how long before you think that happens in health? That's my first question. Second question is, are you optimistic about people's motivation being to positively adopt these technologies?
Okay, so the first investment question, it's very different. The travel industry, what happened was you created a really efficient market where there wasn't one. And so it was a pure commercial thing. A lot more transparency, a lot more user-generated content, user-generated transactions. And so it was a sheer business thing. E-commerce that you mentioned, sort of generally the same thing. Health is a completely different, and that's why it's it's at the beginning of the proof, not the end, because it does involve behavior change, and not simply going on vacation more, but doing things people aren't naturally programmed to do, number one. And number two, finding out, I mean, a lot of this is scientific research. We need data to know what works. Again, it's clear running is probably good for you, but how much, for what genotype do different kinds of interventions work best? So the problems are much bigger, the behavior challenges are much greater, and I would say the win is much larger as well. So I think it's going to take longer and have a more fundamental impact. The interesting thing is the travel business is more competitive. Airline prices, I mean, I don't know the details, but it's cheaper to travel relatively than it used to be. So a lot of cost has been taken out of the industry. The entire travel agency business is a shadow of what it was. In health, I think you're going to see a whole new breed of health counselors providing that motivation. Some people can do it for themselves, some will get it from their friends, but we need kind of like Weight Watchers and therapy groups and so forth. I think there's going to be a whole new career path of becoming a health counselor and talking to people, helping them to be motivated, feeding back to them, whatever. So it's a completely different kind of thing. And the second question,
you talked about the motivation needed to adopt these new lifestyles. How optimistic are you that the human race will adopt these changes?
So I think you can kind of, let's say it's 10%. I don't know, these are very vague numbers that will do it naturally. 20 or 30 will be persuaded one way or another. Then, with luck, what will happen is the stuff they'll serve in schools will start to change. The stuff they'll serve in school cafeterias, the social norms, like what's happened with smoking. Yeah, a lot of people still smoke, but if someone started smoking in here, first of all, probably be against 3 different kinds of rules, and most people would look at them in disgust. So making that kind of change, it's harder because smoking is always bad for you, even though some people like it. Eating a hamburger, there are justifications for that on occasion. So it's a more subtle kind of change. But I think, especially if we have lots of evidence and data, I think those changes can become quite widespread over time. And it will be a huge social benefit, not just in terms of healthcare costs, but in terms of the costs of bad health. People being sick, kids having parents who are bedridden and can't take care of them, disease, whatever.
Would you have a view there as regards which part, will it be the West? Will it be the rich countries that you would see who would first move, or perhaps it might be Africa, or would it be India, where social networks exist already, old and new?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, the poor countries would say, oh, let's not go where those rich guys are going. But unfortunately, I think it's going to happen among the elites in the West and the kind of the global elite. The world is much more cosmopolitan at the 1% level than at the 99% level. Again, I think it will trickle down. And yeah, I mean, it is more cost effective not to get sick. But that's in the long run. In the short run, making all these things work is tough. So it'll happen in the West with the early adopters, with the rich people, and with luck, the rest of the world won't go quite as far. And right now, there's huge incipient diabetes problems in the Middle East, in India, in Russia, it's more drugs and alcohol. In China, it's kind of bad healthcare and pollution as well.
We'll take this man over here. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Ben Curdy. I'm founder of a company called Vocalytics, and what we do is voice analysis. And we try to do as much as possible on mobile devices. And I'm very interested to have your opinion. What are the best use cases at the moment of monitoring health on mobiles, and what would you see happening in the next couple of years? I've heard about, the option to speed on your mobile and you'll get the full analysis. That's probably 5 years, 10 years. I'm more interested in what's possible next.
So right now, you can use it as a pedometer if you attach it securely to your body. I have something from Azumio called a stress test that the camera light shines on your finger and assesses your stress level. It keeps telling me I'm at 1 or 8%, so I like it. I have a sleep monitor from Zio that uses the iPhone plus a couple of other contraptions. And they're ones, you can spit on them. There are others that attach to little devices that you put chips or the litmus paper in. So there's, I mean, again, the phone is simply a computer, and it needs sensors connected to it in one way or another. The ones that are the biggest now are the ones that are obviously cheapest, which is pulse and blood pressure, and but a lot of diabetics are doing glucose levels every day quite reliably.
Chris?
Hi, Esther. My name's Chris, and I'm Chris, and I'm involved in a startup called Get Health, and a lot of the things that you've said, we're trying to make health social and try and sell it as part of an online solution for corporate wellness, particularly in the US. And I suppose from listening to you talk and what we've done a lot in terms of research in particularly the US and then throughout the rest of the world, there's such diversity in terms of what are the problems in different countries and different cultures. And my question is, do you think with using technology, a company can come in and dominate the market on an international scale like Google has done for search engine or Facebook, or is it going to be that each culture is going to be so diverse that it's going to really take one company's full efforts to really try and capture, say, the US market and then the European market?
Yeah, I think it's not even going to be geography necessarily. As I said earlier, there's different mindsets. Everything from women with children is one market, and runners is another. And I mean, in the back end, you're going to have probably 2 or 3 data aggregators. who are going to be very techy, and then there'll be lots of big data analysis at the back end. At the front end, there'll be all kinds of different, much more socially oriented, more culturally and kind of human factors, market segment specific kinds of tools and social networks. So it's going to mirror the real world, which is we want to aggregate all the data from all the people. And I mean, right now, for example, I've got my Zeo, which is on local time, and my Fitbit, which is 24 hours on New York time, no matter where I go. And so I have these two completely separate time-based data sequences. And someday I'd love to put them together. But, you know, and I know technically that's possible. Practically, not at all. It's going to be a big business with APIs. And, yeah, I don't think health is ever going to be a world domination business. It's going to be a get big and then, you know, become part of somebody else. But it's more going to be a business of APIs and kind of fitting into a broader technical ecosystem.
Thanks very much.
And just following on from that, do you think the innovations and the advances will be made through startup companies like yours or the larger companies?
It's going to be the startups. I mean, yes, it's exciting. GE and Walmart, big employers, are starting to look at this, but they are mostly saying, we can't do this ourselves. We want you little guys to come in. We don't want to squish you. Yeah, it's going to be startups, innovators, not necessarily in the U.S., and not necessarily white guys. So.
Do you not think, though, it's a hugely difficult for a startup? I mean, startups, as we know, are difficult at the best of times. But in this area, no matter where and whatever part of the world, they are addressing a health system, just your point, which is the barrier is going to be very high to actually get.
No, you're not. You're eroding the health system. You need to go around the edges and don't even, don't fight them, ignore them. But market to consumers and then maybe market to employers. Because the great thing about employers is they have a slightly longer time scale. I mean, consumers mean well, and it is their body, but at the same time, the donut is here today. From the point of view of employers, they realize if we keep this person healthy this year and they're still an employee 3 years from now, it's really, really going to pay off. They have willpower in a way that consumers don't. Even employers, so you get somebody like Walmart, well, most of their employees stay for half a year, maybe, or a year. But Walmart is so big, they hire the same people back. And again, they have this whole, they may not hire you back, but they're probably going to hire your cousin or the person you go to school with. So large employers actually do start to think in terms of populations and groups and some of the group dynamics I talked about. So they really are the allies. But yeah, I wouldn't try to sell most of these things to a hospital system.
Very good. Any other question? We'll take it here. Yeah. There you go. I'll get you next.
Thanks, Esther, for your talk. I was interested in listening to the parts we spoke about the new frontiers. And I was thinking about, for example, with 23andMe, a lot of what the consumer or client gets is risk analysis of various conditions based on a genetic profile, which of course perhaps isn't the full picture. From your point of view, what do you think is the most useful data that we could collect that would help to improve those predictive models, to give people a more accurate or a better developed idea of the risk of these certain conditions?
Well, so, I mean, long run, what you want is a person's genotype. Then you want their environment, and that includes, did they live near a highway and breathe a lot of polluted air? What kind of water did they have? Did they work in a factory with toxic things? And then, of course, you want their behaviors. What did they eat? did they sleep, what did they drink, and then their outcomes. So what diseases did they get? What therapies did they have, and which of the therapies were effective? And so when you know all that, then you can start modeling the current population and make predictions for the future ones. So in 23andMe right now, we have a couple of little modeling tools where we'll take your genotype and also various blood measurements and BMI and so forth and give you a heart attack, a much better heart attack prediction analysis. Right now, we collect mostly the genotype and then we do a whole lot of surveys. Taking those data and then combining them with the behavior data is what's going to be happening over the next 10 to 20 years. And you can download your 23andMe data and mash it up with anything else you want that you can figure out. So to me, that's really exciting.
I ask this question as a dietitian and an academic and I suppose an entrepreneur who's interested in risk, who's interested in these other issues that come to bear on people's overall risk of disease apart from genomic status. And I think that you're absolutely on the mark, that this is the battleground, integrating these different strands of information and data to develop these predictive models.
Yeah, I mean, so the interesting thing about the behavior is, from a motivational point of view, your weight goes up and down, assuming that, like most people, you want to lower your weight. When it goes up, you need to get it back down, and then you need to go further. That can be very demotivating. Absolutely. But when you start talking about how many steps you take or something like that, you can, it's cumulative. Well, I only did 5,000 steps today, but I can do 8,000 tomorrow. And so you keep getting the positive motivation with less of the negative. And with the various biomarker numbers, again, they're more fine-grained. You can tune them more. So, I mean, much as I love the genome, to some extent, the biomarkers and the other kinds of data are much more interesting from the point of view of the person, much more manipulable. If you know your genome, it can tell you where you might want to concentrate.
Yeah, I agree. And part of this is epigenetics and the influence of these different things. So even though the structure of the genome mightn't change, the way it behaves is probably a frontier that's
and
exploring.
In 10 years we'll understand all of this much better.
Question from the front.
Thanks for coming to Dublin.
Could you speak up? If you could just speak up for the other people.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
So my name is Claudio, and I work in social software. I develop social software for IBM. So there's this funny story about the guy who requested his personal data back from famous social network, and he got like 1,200 pages of PDFs, etc. So you mentioned earlier that there's a big market for APIs related to healthcare. So I'd like to ask you several questions, but I'll keep it short. And so. Aren't you concerned about lock-in? So who owns the data? Once you get your genome, is it your intellectual properties, somebody else's right to keep it and store it forever? What's your opinion on this?
Okay. Oh, I thought you were going to ask 4 questions, but that's all right. It's your data. Now, you may sign a contract saying you can use it for such and such purposes, but not for others. It's your data, but to some extent, it's also your brother's. So when I was first involved with 23andMe, I bought 26 kits for my entire extended family. And I sent them out, and everybody went and did it. And some reporter asked me, I don't know, 6-8 months later, so did you all have a family council and sit and talk about the risk? And I said, no, it never even occurred to me to ask. We just did it because it's a family of scientists. But people have a right to privacy and to deciding whether they want to do it in the first place, what should happen with the data. And again, if you're in a particular family situation, there might be issues. because it's not the data, it's the meaning of the data that's the issue. When you do this, there's a consent form, and if you have any concerns, you should read it and figure out what the deal is and decide whether or not to do it. The reality is, over time, if I want your genotype, I'll just sit next to you and take a piece of your hair surreptitiously. And the reality is, there are certain things about me that I consider private. My genome is not one of them. My behavior, that kind of stuff, it's probably a lot more interesting than what I inherited from my parents. But yeah, it's yours. Over time, for practical purposes, I think probably most children will be genotyped at birth, and the government's going to know everything, and the challenge is to control what the government can do, not what the government knows.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is because generally the European countries are more, like, I'd say, educated into personal affairs matters and everything. So, like, there have been huge progress on the legislation around, human rights and LGBT issues, etc. Once your information is made, available, and you're able to figure out what kind of diseases you're more inclined towards and all that kind of stuff, should is there is indeed a need for providing legislation that protects people with some genetical diseases or predisposition for some conditions and so on?
Well, they need that protection not for the predisposition, but for the disease also. I mean, health insurance is a weird concept that most countries don't even have. The notion, it's no longer insurance if it's almost a certainty that you're going to have some disease. To me, the scariest thing is that the government would say, well, you have a predisposition to diabetes, so we're going to tax you extra for eating sugar. I don't think you should be eating sugar, but I don't think you should be differentially taxed because of your genome. And those things would be scary. I think they're unlikely, but yeah, there's always the possibility of misuse. Sure.
And can I ask you a question? Because the underlying thesis here is that, say, good health and that social networks could be a positive force in the spread of good health. Now, if you look at Google Health, I know it's not quite the same thing, but could you comment on Google Health? Because I believe they've pulled it.
Yeah, they did.
As to why it looked to me, and I think the take-up was infinitesimal.
Yeah.
Could you just comment on the whole initiative? And
I can give you some inside stuff, which is probably interesting. So I was getting interested in health in the early 2000s and mentioned to Larry and Sergey that I thought Google would be a great company to manage people's health records, because they did that for people's email. They kept each person at a separate email account, and they kept it secret. And you may have your own opinions of Google, and regardless, you should be grateful to them for the €1 million. But it seemed to me that they would be a great company to do something like Google Health. So it's not that I created Google Health. They had the idea independently. Lots of other people did. But I went to talk to them about that. And Sergey said, do you mind if I bring in a friend of mine who knows a lot more about all this health stuff than I do? And I said, sure. And that was Ann Wojcicki, who at the time was his girlfriend and is now his wife, and started 23andMe. And that's how I met her and how I ended up on the board of 23andMe. Now, why it did not succeed is really there's a nice controlled experiment here. So Google Health was free, came out of its owner's obsession with data, and it wouldn't be cool to have this data store that people would use. No marketing, no support, no interest, and no consumers, basically. Whereas from the Microsoft point of view, they have a large business selling all kinds of software to hospitals and clinics and the establishment that I disparaged earlier. So they make money off this stuff. And for them, Microsoft Health Vault was simply a kind of like a free trial version to bring in consumers. It was part of a business unit that was making money, that had resources, and they supported it vis-a-vis some of their clients. It was part of a revenue-generating business model, so it got much better treatment, got better support. They worked with various institutions to use it, and that's sort of two tales and two completely different outcomes. Now, Microsoft Health Vault isn't exactly the biggest EHR in the world, but it is out there and it's being used and is, getting slow, continuing uptake as far as I know.
I believe Denmark has a very successful system driven by the hospital because it's so centralized in EHRs. Yeah. Do you know anything about that or about
I know a little. They're doing a lot of work with genotyping as well. I mean, any small country that's well organized and fairly homogeneous. Another one that comes to mind is Iceland. It's much easier to do that, and it's also a country in which people trust their government a lot more than they do in the U.S. So it's great. They'll get a lot of really interesting data. They won't get a lot of diversity of data, most likely, but they're much more likely to generate useful population-level statistics than we are.
Any other questions?
About cosmonauts as well, if you want.
She really wants to talk about cosmonauts.
I don't mind. I want to talk about new TLDs.
Liam. Hi, how are you doing? My name is Liam. I work with Chris. And our overall vision with Get Health is to be a foursquare of health, targeting specifically about motivation and trying to make it fun. Mm-hmm. So the first question is, how do you see health being fun? And the second part of the question is, how would you, what advice would you give to potential investors or angel investors trying to get into the space of health, if it is their initial or first step? Right.
Well, how you make it be fun is, again, going to vary from market to market. But so you probably have done this already. I'm just telling your competitors, but read a couple of books on game dynamics. Go watch the movie Up in the Air. Have you seen that? When the guy takes his airline cards out and puts them on the table, and they mean status, and they mean sex, and they mean, people work really, really hard to get those points, and they mean a lot, and they're not going to lie. I mean, who would want to gain their status through lying? They want to earn it and feel proud of it and show it off and get girls and whatever. So it's not just fun, it's achievement that really, really motivates people. I mean, so points, other people, status, badges, finding friends, using their social networks, and creating meaningful challenges, and then getting institutions to work with you to create meaningful rewards or challenges and so forth. What the airlines have done with their miles is a model for any of those game businesses. I just got an email from American Airlines yesterday offering me double points for the next month.
Very good. At the very back.
Hi, Esther. I work for a company. I'm CTO for a company called NeuroHero. We're also kind of working in the e-health space. I'm just wondering, actually, I mean, you've mentioned kind of motivation and social as one of the possible solutions. I suppose, like for the last 20 years, people have been looking at kind of merging technology and health, and we haven't really seen a kind of a widespread adoption. So my first question is, I suppose, do you actually have any proof, really, or evidence that motivation and social is going to be the thing that's going to tip this over the edge? And the second, just real short question is, can you point to a company that's really nailed this motivation as something that's really making that's the driving success behind them? Okay,
no real proof, or you'd have much bigger VCs and larger companies in the business. I'm staking a lot of money on the belief, and I'd say have little small inkling. I have enough proof to persuade me. I don't have enough proof to persuade a judge or a banker. And that's sort of what I'm saying. I think you're going to see it go in waves. And again, the proof is less that the stuff works and more that the proof around that the motivation will get people to do those things. So, yeah, I could point you to some case studies with Keas, Keas. If you look at Alcoholics Anonymous, I think it's a pretty good example of those motivational social groups working. Not for everybody, not 100%, but a lot more effective than anything else that's been tried. And then you look at the power of advertising and all the other things that get people to do things, including, I think airline miles is a great example of how applying game dynamics and social pressure. I mean, for me, I don't get the miles to fly more. I get the miles so that I can be first online, so that I don't have to, so I get a better seat, so I don't need to worry about having to check my luggage, so that I get to stay in the lounge. I can imagine a health motivation scheme where if you take your meds reliably, you have a special number to call. If you end up being sick, you get a nicer room in the hospital, or they give you flowers. Use your imagination to figure out what's a relevant motivational set of things that would apply in a particular context to a particular kind of people. But no, I don't have proof. I just have.
No, I mean, okay, I'm not supposed to.
Well, no, I mean, if I did have proof, I'd have too much competition.
I mean, I think it's interesting what you said, like that the motivation can come from somewhere almost external, because, you know, I don't need new technology to tell me that I'm overweight, or like I can use a weighing scales, right? And that's just kind of like me being independent. But when you start linking it into, like, I think you're right, like external services, or miles, or, you know, being first in the queue when you go to visit your therapist or whatever it is, you know, things like that are definitely kind of tangible. I think that's a good point. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll tell a sort of interesting story about how weird people are, and it's about myself because I can do that. I started this when I was 18, swimming an hour a day. And except for when I was in my space training and missed 2 weeks in a row, I've pretty much swum 364 days a year since I was 18. And it was an hour. So I'm extremely disciplined, I'm healthy, all this stuff, and you'd think I'm a paragon of virtue, but I could not get myself to floss my teeth. My parents were Europeans, like you, and they thought flossing was an American affectation, and I just never got around. You know, so I'd floss my teeth once a week or something. And then one day, an embarrassingly short number of years ago, I thought, I'll floss my teeth tonight and I'll take 5 minutes off my swimming time tomorrow. I did that the next day and the next day. And now I'm down to 50, but probably for about 5 months, I actually made that bargain each night. I will floss my teeth tonight and I will swim 5 minutes less the next day. And then it just became natural. But the point of the story is that each person needs to find their own little weird trick or set of tricks. And as a business, you try and find more of these tricks and find more of them for more different kinds of people that actually work. But they're likely to be very, very bizarre to the outside observer. So I flossed last night.
There's hope for us all, yes. Yeah. Another question here. We'll take 2 last questions. I'm just aware of the time. I think, Ian, you said 7. Okay.
Would you tell us something about your astronaut training?
Okay. And what's the other question? Maybe we'll just do both together, or I'll try and... There was one more?
Yes, there is another one up here. We'll take this astronaut first, if you like.
No, I mean, it depends on what the other one is.
Over here, up at the top. Sorry, I just...
Yeah. Conor McKenna. In relating to your astronaut training, did you see people working in the space industry solve problems differently?
From Russia versus in...
Just the way that the people that were hired in that environment, did they solve problems differently?
Okay.
Or how did they solve problems? So maybe that's the second question.
Yeah, okay. Well, we could do another half hour on space training, and I won't. There's the business side of it, which is one thing that I think is actually going to work, but it's going to be very, very long term. What's interesting about space is it's becoming privatized. Kind of like, I remember 20 years ago, there was this thing called the Commercial Internet Exchange, which was kind of a liberation movement for the internet to be used commercially. At the time, it was a scientific government network, and people were shocked that a computer company would send out an invitation to a sales seminar over the holy internet. And there's kind of this same, in many places, feeling that space should be done by governments, and now it's being invaded by these pesky commercial startups. So traditional space, to answer the questions, how people solve problems, traditional space is very risk averse. Partly because it's space and it's dangerous, partly because it's a government program, partly because it's just, it's an old industry done by people who've been through it and made mistakes and been pilloried for them. So there's a real aversion to risk-taking and to new things. Now, you don't want to risk human lives, but there are lots of other places in space where you could take a lot of risks, and they still don't. And the Russians and the Americans were pretty much the same in that. I would say in general, the Americans were more efficient, but also more bureaucratic. In Russia, everything difficult, nothing impossible. Whereas in the US, if they have a rule, that's the rule. It was an amazing experience. Half of the fun of it was getting to know the American astronauts, not just the Russian cosmonauts, because they all trained together in Star City. And that really was the place where US-Russian friendships happened in the 80s, long before they happened in any other sphere. And the one thing I discovered that was really interesting and somewhat relevant here is how much of space training was actually about physical and medical stuff, which makes sense, but you don't realize it until you go through the training. What are they doing? They're shipping bodies into space. So there's a lot of interest in how the bodies work. I got poked and prodded and inspected by Russian medical people, which was not always pleasant. And a lot of the training was life support and how to cook things in plastic canisters and change the toilet and deal with the water supply and the oxygen supply and stuff like that. It was really mostly, other than a little bit about how to navigate the spacecraft, which I wasn't supposed to do anyway because I was the tourist, but it was useful for me to know. It was mostly about plumbing in space. You're doing it. The questions need to be brief.
It's a cosmonaut question. So I'm interested in flying. I used to fly myself as a hobby. If people are in a spacecraft, their behavior, or on a ship at sea, or anywhere in fact, their behavior is very important. Our behavior is driven by, to an extent, our psychophysiology. Emotion drives behavior. So I've worked with some Russian devices, one of which was a form, they would claim, a new form of electrotherapy. That's debatable. And they claim to have discovered Curlian photography, or somebody did, which may have measured something. That's debatable. But my question is this: when you were out at Star City, did they develop remote ways of defining or measuring people's behavior? And I say it in this context, my study is in heart rate variability, and its link between that and the emotional centers of the brain, which drive behavior. So could they measure remotely in some way behavior?
The Russians and the Americans certainly are very conscious of psychology and issues and people relationships and stuff. And they gave they gave me a psychology test. They give one to everybody, and it felt a bit hokey, to be candid. So one of the greatest experiences was we did this 2-night overnight in the wilderness, live in a tent in the snow training. Me and 2 cosmonauts who were nice gentlemen, and they chopped down the trees. I picked up the twigs to make our tent. And when the thing was over, we went back into this little hotel place, and one of the cosmonauts got quite drunk and started pretending to be the psychologist and ask us the test questions. It was wild. It was great. So with that, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Esther, for a very illuminating and wide-ranging discussion. Thank you.